Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Winning at Life Behind Enemy Lines. And I am your host, hashtag one time, man, have we got another good one for you today. It's going to be a follow-up show to Relationships Part-1, Behind Enemy Lines. This one is a sequel to that, Relationships Behind Enemy Lines Part-2, Watch How We Come Out. Yep, we're going to dive deep today into the complexities of relationship and lay a little bit of the foundation for what I mean when we talked about divine order of relationships and revisit the 7 principles I believe that support what I think a divine order relationship is, and we'll take a look at that. All right. Well, most importantly, one of the things we'll do is we'll come up with some strategies. We'll tell some stories, but most of all, we're going to talk about how we can come out stronger, victorious, and winners, even in bad relationships. What place do they have in our lives? What is the meaning of toxic relationships for us? We'll talk about all that. And so we've begun a new segment on the show. And before we dive into Relationships Part-2, watch how we come out of that, I'd like to read a comment that was posted. And I appreciate all of your comments. If you watch an episode and you like it or whether you don't like it, whether you agree or whether you don't agree, drop me a comment. I really like to hear from you. But this one comes from, I'm not going to tell you which one, but this one comes from one of my nieces. And it's real short and sweet and to the point. But I wanted to read her comment and say thank you so very much for watching the show, for your support of the show. And she writes, love it all. Thank you so much, niece. Thank you so much for your support and on my journey of this podcast, because I believe, again, it is a part of my purpose, and I believe that I'm doing what I am supposed to be doing. And in one of the episodes a couple weeks ago, we talked about hustling in your purpose. And so if you hadn't had the opportunity to go back and listen and watch that, go back and listen and watch that episode, Hustling in Your Purpose and Hustling Behind Enemy Lines. And so before we start today's episode, though, I personally want to go on record. I want to go on record and just before we get into this episode of relationships, let me go on record and say that it is my belief that no one walking this earth before or now has a perfect family or a perfect relationship in their family. It is impossible. Yet, at the same time, though, you cannot afford to sit around for people, whether it's in your family, on your job, with your friends, in your community, etc. You can't sit around and wait to build, sustain, and grow a healthy relationship if it isn't in a person's priority. And to top that, you can't make everything a priority. Some situations in our lives require that we have a order of priority. And I believe that that is a divine order that is attached to your purpose. No one has time to put every person, everything at the top of their priority list. But I believe one of the ways you weed that out is through making sure or investigating whether or not it is aligned with your purpose. You'll weed a whole lot of accidental relationships that we tend to oftentimes get into. You'll weed out what's not aligned in your purpose through relationships if we go by the divine order. And what was the divine order of a relationship or relationships that we talked about? Number one, I believe you need a relationship with God. This is where the foundation of everything in your life and direction is going to go. This connection that you have, and He'll lead you and God will guide you. But I also believe that the next relationship that we ought to have is a relationship with ourselves, because when you have self awareness and self love, you set the tone for how to connect with other individuals. And then I believe we need a relationship, and here's where we are. I believe you really need a relationship with your family, and how important a relationship with your family. Your family, to me, is your first community. The making and the nucleus of your family is so important, I believe. But we'll talk about where people get behind enemy lines as it pertains to relationships and relationships with those in their family, whether it's your spouse, your parents, your kids, your relatives, your close friends. There's a divine order that helps to intensify those relationships which we have in the family. So, on the last episode, Part 1, relationships behind enemy lines, we also explored 7 principles, though, that I really believe support the divine order. And in those, we had communication. We talked about it. Communication is important. If you ever tried to have a conversation with someone and everything turns into an argument, you need to investigate that. Trust. If there's no trust in the relationship cannot be sustained and the relationship cannot grow. Honesty. You've got to be honest. You can't be deceitful in a relationship. You got to be upfront. I used to tell people all the time, I heard the saying, I'm not from Texas. I've lived here a long time. I'm not from Texas, but I got here just as soon as I can. And I'm going to pack a pistol when it comes to my understanding about where I am. And again, I'm talking about myself also when it comes to the divine order of relationships and when it comes to the 7 principles of relationships. In fact, I'll tell you a story. Before I started this podcast, I had been having a very uneasy feeling about it because I said, one of the things that's near and dear to my heart is to talk about family, to talk about relationships, understanding that all relationships, even within the nucleus of a family, is not perfect. I get it. I get that. But I believe that there's an order even in the family, in family relationships. And we'll dig into that just a little bit toward the end. And I'll tell you, even sometimes when you can't seem to get it going, get it right, as it pertains to a relationship with persons or people within your family, when there's strife, when there's conflict, when there's dissension, within the family dynamic of a relationship, everybody suffers because I believe within our DNA, I don't think anybody wakes up and just says, you know what, I just want to have a bad relationship with my sister, with my brother, with my cousin, with my wife. I just want to have a horrible relationship with my kids. And so, up under the 7 guidances that we talked about, communication, trust, respect, honesty, commitment. And some folk just aren't committed to healthy relationships for whatever reason you want to talk about. Some folks just aren't committed to having and sustaining and growing a healthy relationship. But you get to weed that out when you understand in the divine order what role relationships of individuals play in your life, and is it aligned with your purpose? There's very little compromise, very little compromise. And so on episode 1, relationships behind enemy lines, part 1, we talked about those things, that divine order, those 7 principles that support the divine order. And out of the divine order, relationships with God, relationships with yourself, or relationship with yourself, relationship with your family and your community. This time I chose to focus on the family. I chose to focus on the family. So it happens oftentimes. How people tend to define divine in relationships. Some people believe everything happens at the right time and in the right way. Some people believe God has a purpose for everything, good and bad. And some people believe we should trust God's plan and accept nothing happens by accident. I tend to agree with those. Well, let me open up the floodgates and talk a little bit about how those principles, how those divine orders, how the divine orders of relationships and how the principles has played out in a particular day and time. You can go back, I'll go back to the 60s, maybe 10 years before that. And let's take a moment to reflect on how relationships were viewed, seen, and practiced during that time. I'll give you just a few statistics on that. Over the past 50 years, marriage rates amongst African Americans have declined significantly. In the 1960s, 70% of Black adults were married. Today, that number is around 30%. Let me say that again. In the 1960s, 70% of Black adults were married. Today, that number has dwindled down to 30%. Meanwhile, divorce rates have actually dropped because fewer people are getting married. Fewer of us are getting married. And then there are other challenges that confront our community today as it pertains to why relationships seem not to be oftentimes. Now, if you have uh, a healthy, sustainable relationship in your family, God bless you. But I guarantee you know someone that knows someone that does not. And there are other challenges that I believe our community is up against today. That's a drastic swing. In the 1960s, 70% of African American adults were married, and today is 30%. I believe some of the roadblocks, I believe that some of the things that has us behind enemy lines in today's relationships and how we relate, amongst a whole lot of things. Pick one. Pick one. Relationships, though, seem individualized today. I'm going to look out for me. I'm going to take care of me. And I'm going to try to take care of my immediate, my nucleus, my family. Now, don't forget, though, everybody can't make everything and everyone a priority in your life. But follow along with me. Since we've gained our independence, we've also lost some of the communal support that we used to have in the family. Man, when I was growing up, 8, 9, 10 years old, I loved my life because every weekend, one of my cousins, my aunties, somebody was over at our house. Somebody was over at our house all the time. And they helped my mom take care of the 9 kids also that she had. And by take care of, I mean nurture, playing their role, playing their purpose in our lives, taught us respect. Those aunts and uncles did that. I used to love when my dad say, hey, this weekend we're going to drive over to wherever and we're going to see some relatives. And they'd have kids and we'd be playing. And it was just a beautiful life. It was a beautiful life. But today, there are economic disparities that keep parents working. There is the high divorce rate that we have that breaks down communication oftentimes because there's no time devoted to it. There are things that are in the 7 principles that are missing. It's communication that's missing. It's trust that's missing. Respect is absent. And it's making people have more individualized, self-preservation type relationships. But I believe we can win if we not only understand the divine order of relationships, but if we understand a lot about what the key issues are and start attacking those key issues from behind enemy lines. Grab a love hand grenade and throw it out there and blow up everything in your path that's not aligned to your purpose in the relationship and go on. Communication is in the tank. Oh yeah, although we are the most advanced nation as it pertains to communication, everybody has a cell phone. I'm seeing videos now of people in third world countries. And in the video, you can see, the community, dirt roads or a hut. And so, but I know people want you to see what you want to see. But my point is that everybody has communication at their disposal, but very few people are relating. Very few people in terms of relationships in our community. If it were so, show me some other statistical numbers from 1960 to the present that doesn't speak to how we're relating to each other. When in the 1960s, we had 60% of African American adults who were married, and today it's down to 30%, or 40%, nearly half are no longer married or are getting married. It's an impact, I believe, that has on our relationships. Understanding and trust is just about gone. And it takes a lot of young people for me. The reason I like young people and have always worked around and worked with young people is because, man, they keep you on the cutting edge. They teach you some things about where we're headed. And you know the saying, if you want to gauge the future of a nation, look at these young people. But I tell you, we've got a problem relating the type of respect that is required for any generation to produce the offspring and the success as a community. We got a problem with distrust. We got a problem with trauma. We've got a problem with social media and how it depicts relationships oftentimes in our communities. Broken family relationships are causing many of us to be left behind enemy lines and to experience what I believe to be a lot of asymmetrical relationships happening. Asymmetrical relationships. And what do I mean when I say asymmetrical relationships? It's hard, y'all, when one person is constantly giving of their time, giving of their energy, pouring in, providing resources, while the other one barely contributes. You can't have a relationship. You can't have a relationship like that. And over time, it's like a seesaw that creates resentment. I'm just really fed up with it. I am burnt out of trying to make this relationship fit into what the divine order that is aligned to my purpose is. I believe relationships altogether, though, you must have respect on all both ends in order for it to grow. No family is perfect at all. But here's some things that I think we need to understand about the dynamics about the family relationship that also supports the 7 principles that support the divine order of relationships. I believe communication is key. Open, honest, respectful communication. It strengthens trust and understanding within a family. But you got to have boundaries, though. They matter. Healthy boundaries ensure mutual respect and protect individuals within the family. It insulates them. You got to have the boundaries. Understand that conflict is normal. It is normal for sisters and brothers to fight. Man, when I was growing up, let me tell you, and we get this from our dad. Everybody, just about, I believe, all my siblings, had a nickname that my dad gave us. And this is a good time to tell you, one time is the nickname my dad gave me. one time. Now, I don't know if it's because he just asked me to do something one time and I did it, or I think my sister, one of my older sisters, can attest to probably why my dad gave me the nickname of one time. But we had all kind of nicknames. I'm not even going to get into it. I know some family members are listening, but oftentimes that created conflict in the family when you got called a name. I used to get called a name. I'm like, it would be torture today, the nicknames uh, that I had. But that was building of relationships within my family. We still do it today. We still do it today, and everybody in my family is up there in age. And when we get together, I'm the master of it. I'm messing with everybody because it's a strategy. I start messing with you before you start messing with me because I know when you start messing with me, I'm gonna go somewhere and sit down and get quiet. So I'm gonna get mine. I'm gonna get my lick out of the way. But conflict is normal. Love, though, is action. You can't tell me you want to have a relationship with me, and I can't tell you that I want to have a relationship with you, and I don't meet you, and we don't meet halfway. Action is involved in building healthy relationships. Every family, every family is unique. I hadn't seen one that is the same. I've seen some that have similarities, that have issues, and that are behind enemy lines as it pertains to having good, healthy, sustainable relationships with people in your immediate realm. I've seen it. I have seen it. But there is a time though when it just don't work. When you've done everything that you know to do. And some people say, well, what's the saying? If you're gonna win the battle, you've got to stay in the fight. Well, sometimes you can win the battle and retreat. There are plenty times in war. Retreat does not necessarily mean that you give up. Retreat just means I need to fall back a little bit and see if this is in the divine order, if this relationship is purposeful, if this relationship is providential and not accidental, and it aligns with my purpose. And when we seek help on when to retreat from a relationship that is not aligned with your purpose, when we seek help to try to understand where does this relationship begin, where does it stay, and where does it end? How can we make it sustainable? Oftentimes, though, when we're behind enemy lines in a relationship, you've got to retreat. You've got to fall back. So, how do you know when it's time to seek help in your relationship to heal it, or when it's time for you to fall back and retreat? Here's a few signs for you. You're stuck in the same arguments without any resolution at all. Trust has been broken and you can't rebuild it on your own. It's got to be a priority if you want to sustain in the relationship. When you feel like you've done all you can do to stand, and you can't. You've got to retreat sometime. The therapy, even the counseling, or even speaking with a trusted individual, a lot of times can help. But I believe the first person you go to is the one in the divine order that you must first have a relationship with, and that is God. But even God sometimes, even God sometimes orchestrates breakups, splits, because he see you suffering in it, and it ain't aligned at that time with your purpose. I believe that he orchestrates them. I never forget the example of an orchestrated breakup in the Bible. Abraham and Lot. The split between Abraham and Lot, as described, was a pivotal moment in their relationship. Abraham said, I got to retreat. Here's some reasons why, though, that speak to Abraham's aligned purpose and divine order of the relationship that he had with God. The first conflict that Lot and Abraham had was the land they shared could no longer support both Abraham and Lot's growing herds. God had blessed Abraham's so that it actually spilled over in the Lot. Abraham had a whole bunch of sheep, and Lot had a whole bunch of sheep. And they were wealthy. Their wealth led to competition for limited resources, though, like water, where the sheep were going to graze. But avoiding strife was almost inevitable. Abraham, though, because he walked and lived in his purpose, he valued peace and harmony. And to prevent going into conflict, and like people say today, don't disturb my peace. Abraham said, hey man, hey Lot, I'm not going to let you disturb my peace. I'm not going to let you get between the divine order in the relationship first that I have with God and how he has blessed me. To prevent going into conflict and disrupting the peace and potentially themselves, Abraham proposed that we separate. I've got to fall back. He showed his desire, though, to maintain goodwill and unity. They both went different paths. Abraham and Lot had different versions of what the future holds. Lot chose the grassy plains of the Jordan Valley, and Abraham remained in Canaan, concentrating on his covenant and purpose with God. They didn't agree spiritually. They didn't agree on God's plan. And they had to separate. Don't forget, that was orchestrated by God. Abraham was Lot's uncle. There was some close blood there. Abraham's brother. That was Abraham's brother's son. And he had to retreat. He had to give in and say, I'm going to go with the divine order. I'm going to go with my purpose. And oftentimes that's not a bad thing. Here's how we come out of it. Now I want you to watch how we come out of this. Winning in relationships start with self-examination. Ask yourself, is this relationship aligned with my purpose? Is it within the divine order? Am I bringing everything that I possibly can into this relationship? Or is it just asymmetrical, where one of us is giving and contributing everything and has kind of made it a priority? When you focus on self growth within a relationship, it'll shock you. I often stand in front of the mirror and evaluate myself. I haven't done this. I haven't done that. I haven't made every effort. The 7 principles also apply to me, just like I believe they apply to everyone. If you must end a relationship, if you must retreat, on the way out though, because communication is still key. On the way out, be honest. Communicate your feelings clearly and respectfully about why you finna fall back. Protect yourself. Protect yourself. Worrying about relationships like worrying about anything else is not good for your health. Another one of the things we need to do is make sure before we fall back, you need to seek guidance. And the first entity who you seek guidance for in a relationship is with the first person you have a relationship with, and that is God. But remember though, retreating doesn't mean you failed. Sometimes it's a step toward the freedom and growth you need to get back on course, to get back online and build relationships that are aligned with your purpose. And we can do that. We can definitely come out winners. But I say, watch how we come out. You can still come out a winner, even though you may have to retreat. You'll come out a for sure winner, though, if your relationship is healed. I'll tell you a story. Before I started this podcast, I had been having some uneasy feelings because I kind of had a feeling that I'm going to talk a lot about relationships. I'm going to talk a lot about relationships. And one morning during my devotion time, it hit me. For years, I had not had the type of relationship with my 2 sons that I've wanted to. And it hit me. Something said, before you go on and talk about relationships, heal from your own. So I called my sons one day and I said, hey, look, y'all, let's meet. Let's meet at a restaurant and we'll sit down, have a conversation. We met. And it was plain as day. I told my sons, look, if I've done anything that was absence of anything in the 7 principles, that help support a divine relationship, if I haven't communicated, if I haven't understood anything that I've done, I'm sorry, but I'm here now. And we sat there and just, I could see it and I could feel it. The chains of being behind enemy lines were broken. And now I think I get on my son's nerve so bad. I called him one day and said, "Hey, what you doing?" He said, "Dad, I'm at work." I'm like, okay. I just wanted to have a little bit of that relationship time. And I'm so glad that we did. So you can come out a winner. We can come out winners. We can come out victorious behind enemy lines as it pertains to relationships. Watch how you come out if you make those things applicable. The 7 principles. You're moving in the divine order. You're healing relationships. You're evaluating those relationships do not align with your purpose. And even after you have to retreat or relationship is ended, you can still win. Focus on the healing and the learning and the building stronger relationships that actually align with your purpose. Hey, look, I want to challenge you to take a moment to reflect on your family relationships. Are they where you want them to be? No, no one's family relationship is perfect, and we know that. But are they healthy? Are they aligned? Are they aligned with your purpose? And do they speak to that divine order that we need to have? Hey, I want you to join me for the next episode, which will be a 2-part series entitled Left Behind Enemy Lines. There's a part 1 and a part 2 where we talk and go into what is the status of our young people? What is the status of their education? Where are they with their mental health? What does their future look like? It's going to be a fantastic series, and then we'll wrap up part 2 of Left Behind Enemy Lines with where do we go from here? On our next episode, though, our very next episode, I want you to stay tuned because we're talking about living my best life behind enemy lines. Yep, where we want to rediscover the joys, the purpose, and the success that we are having. And even doing that in the face of challenges that we have. I want to remind you though, if you like the podcast, if you like the message, please like, share, and subscribe and hit that notification bell when you're on YouTube. You can find me on Facebook at Fitzgerald Reynolds. You can find me on YouTube at Kenneth Reynolds 7660 and on Instagram, one time BEL, that's ONETIMEBEL and the number 1. Enjoyed our session today. I look forward to seeing you on the next episode. And remember, if you are going to win the battle, you have got to stay in the fight. Peace, everybody, and God bless.